Hi everybody. The semiconductor crisis is one of the most critical economic threats looming over the world economy for 1 year now. This crisis has been so bad that Apple lost $6 billion in revenue, Maruti had to cut down 60% of their production, Mahindra had to cut down 20% of its production, and the auto industry itself has already lost $100 billion in revenue due to chip shortages. And India being one of the largest and fastest growing electronic market in the world, our economy is again vulnerable to a massive threat due to this crisis. The question is, how did the semiconductor crisis get so bad? What is the strategy that the Indian government is deploying to become an opportunist in this situation? And most importantly, as investors into the stock market, what are the factors that you need to keep an eye on to understand the impact of the semiconductor crisis on the stock market? To start from the basics, for those who come from a non-engineering background, semiconductor chip is basically the brain of any electronic device, and they are responsible to conduct every small action in our electronic devices and cars. For example, in your mixer, it controls the speed of the motor. In a car, there are hundreds of semiconductors that handle everything, starting from your keyless entry to automatic doors and even the functioning of your engine. And today, in this digital world that we live in, semiconductors are by far the most important components that keep the world functioning, starting from mobile phones to the biggest servers in the world. And they are as important, if not more important than the internet itself. So the question is, why is there a sudden shortage of semiconductors and what is its impact on different industries? The first reason for this shortage is that the industry had already been growing at such a rapid pace that it was already at the brink of shortage. According to the Semiconductor Industry Association, today more than 100 billion integrated circuits are in use every single day all across the world, which is literally equal to the number of stars in our corner of the Milky Way galaxy. This market is so huge that even with giant players like Intel, Micron, Nvidia, AMD and Qualcomm, there still isn't enough supply to cater to the skyrocketing demand. Therefore, when the pandemic hit, on one side, while the demand of electronic gadgets skyrocketed due to work from home, on the other side, due to the temporary shutdown of factories and shipping services, the demand went way beyond the supply capacities. And the reason why this shortage is so difficult to recover is because manufacturing a microchip typically takes more than 3 months and involves giant factories, dust-free rooms, multi-million-dollar machines, molten tin and lasers. And since the manufacturing cannot be increased on such a short notice, the wait times for chip is increasing at an alarming rate, going from just 11.8 weeks in September 2019 to 21 weeks in August 2021. Meanwhile, according to Statista, the chip industry that was already worth 440 billion in 2020 is estimated to grow to 550 billion in 2021 and will touch $600 billion by early 2022. And this drastic difference in supply and demand is the reason why companies from all across the world from different sectors have started facing production issues. And the 4 major industries that face the heat are the auto industry, the LED lighting industry, consumer electronics industry, and the appliance industry. In the auto industry, while Ford and GM in the US have been drastically affected, in India, like we saw, in just the second quarter of 2022, Maruti could not produce an estimated 1.16 lakh vehicles due to the semiconductor shortage. This is the reason why Maruti's output was nearly down by 60% in September, that too just before the festive season in India. In consumer electronics, while HP raised the price of its printers by 20% on an average in a single year, Sony said that it will not produce adequate supplies of its PlayStation 5 console until at least 2022. Similarly, a large number of companies have been deeply affected by the semiconductor shortage of the world. This is when many countries, including India, realized that it is super important to be a part of the semiconductor ecosystem, and it is high time that we decrease our dependence on other countries merely by being the customers of semiconductors. So the question is, what is the position of India in the semiconductor market and what is the government doing to de-risk this situation? Well, the sad news is that in spite of we having Intel, Micron and Samsung housing their R&D centers in India, we have nothing significant in chip manufacturing. And even if you look at India's semiconductor trade situation, while we exported $425 million worth of semiconductors in 2020, we imported $10.59 billion worth of semiconductors. And with a growing electronics market, our semiconductor imports grew by 100% from just $5.2 billion in 2016 to $10.59 billion in 2020. And the scariest part of all is that About 40% of our imports originate from China and 26% comes from Hong Kong. And we all know how China is notoriously trying to take control of Hong Kong. Therefore, just like solar wafers and ingots, India is again vulnerable to more semiconductor shortages that could cost us billions of dollars. So the question is, what is India doing to fix this situation and decrease its dependence on China? The answer to this lies in something called the Quad Summit, which was a leaders' conference held by President Biden on 24th of September 2021. And the agenda was to discuss how to tackle the several economic challenges of respective countries, and one of them was the semiconductor shortage of the world. Now people, I don't know how many of you have felt this, but then every time I hear these terms like bilateral summit or the presidents and prime ministers meeting up, I often wondered as to what exactly is the result of these meetings. But in spite of these meetings being critical to our nation's economy, no one ever teaches us the importance of these meetings in schools and colleges. So here's a quick explanation of what happened in the Quad Summit so that you know about these critical international strategies and, more importantly, the role of your country and the contribution of the government that you elected. So in simple words, chip manufacturing is a complex process that requires multiple steps. So if each country sets up 5 divisions for 5 different processes, then it is both costly and time consuming. Which is why India, Australia, Japan and US have decided to collaborate together to implement only those processes that are their strengths and pass on the rest to the rest of the countries. For example, US is a global leader in semiconductor design, and American companies also dominate in electronic design automation and licensed intellectual property. Japanese companies enjoy a dominant position in semiconductor materials and chemicals that are used for manufacturing chips. And Japan is also a market leader in silicon wafers and substrates on which the ICs get made. Similarly, Australia occupies an important place in the broader electronic supply chain as it has access to the critical materials and advanced mining capabilities. And lastly, the semiconductor design requires a large number of skilled engineers and laborers, and this is where India comes in. So in the Quad Summit, Australia, US, Japan and India have joined hands to build a robust semiconductor supply chain based on their strengths to eliminate their dependence on China, Taiwan and Hong Kong. And this is where India's 76,000 crore production-linked incentive program comes in, wherein the central government of India plans to establish 20 semiconductor units in the country over the next 2 years. The question is, how does this work out? Now listen to this very carefully because you need to do some stock market homework on this. To tackle the semiconductor shortage and de-risk India from China, the government has lined up an attractive incentive support for companies engaged in silicon semiconductor fabs, display fabs, compound semiconductors, silicon photonics, sensors fabs, semiconductor packaging and semiconductor design. And like we saw in the Solar Wars case study, because of PLI, land, semiconductor grade water, power, logistics and research ecosystem will be provided to these companies at a subsidized rates to set up 2 greenfield semiconductor fabs and 2 display fabs in the country. Apart from this, we have the design linked incentive scheme and the India Semiconductor Mission. I'll give you the links to these scheme details in the description, so read through them and find out the public listed companies that will benefit from these incentives because you might find some hidden stock market gems there. So long story short, all these new schemes announced by the government are expected to contribute to the $1 trillion digital economy by 2025-26. It has a production target close to $128 billion over the next 20 years, and exports are expected to touch $68.97 billion over the next 20 years. And if this happens, along with the successful execution of the Quad Summit agreements, India will definitely go on to become a hub of semiconductors, and more importantly, we will be less dependent on China for the same. This is how India plans to go from being an importer of semiconductors to a major exporter of semiconductor in the global market. And this brings me to the most important part of the episode, and that is, as investors in the stock market and more importantly, as citizens of India, what are the factors that you need to keep an eye on to understand the trajectory of the semiconductor market of India, and what are the best sources to help you understand it deeper? Meanwhile, if you're keen on investing into specific Indian companies that are now standing up against the Chinese industries, you must definitely check out the China Plus One strategy Small Case. Small Case is this wonderful company that helps you strategically invest into a basket of stocks such that you can get the best return on investment in any market condition. In this case, like I said, the most relevant small case is the China Plus One strategy Small Case. This small case consists of hand-picked stocks of companies from different sectors like textile, electronics and even the renewable energy sector. The best part is that The small case manager himself will rebalance the stocks strategically depending on the market conditions to give you the best returns possible. And even if you don't want to make any investments, you can use my favorite feature of this app, and those are the news section and the blog posts that are again curated market related content to give you the most valuable information about the companies in the stock market. So if you want to make the most strategic investments into the stock market, download the small case app from the link in the description. Moving on, here are the 3 important factors that you need to keep an eye on to understand the semiconductor market of India. Number 1, keep a very close eye on the production linked incentive program of the government and find out which are the public listed companies that could become a beneficiary of this incentive scheme. And at the same time, before this, the government already attempted to roll out attractive subsidies and yet it failed. So do some homework and find out why did it exactly fail. And if you know the answer to this, drop a comment below about the same. Number 2, India is now partnering with Taiwan, which is now sternly opposing the Chinese takeover. And India is having this partnership in order to establish semiconductor units in India. And Taiwan is very critical because the Taiwanese contract manufacturers together accounted for more than 60% of the total global foundry revenue last year. And it would not be an exaggeration if we say that the world is dangerously dependent on Taiwan for semiconductors. So have a look at all the documents that I've attached in the description and you will gain some fascinating insights about the delicate geopolitical situation with respect to the semiconductor industry of the world. And thirdly, keep an eye on the Quad Summit fact sheet and how it brings new opportunities to the Indian economy. And lastly, after you download the small case app, you will find a blog post on the China Plus One strategy. This PDF has a broad overview of all the sectors that India is preparing to strengthen in order to de-risk the Indian economy from China. And if you understand this properly, you can then further research and find out which are the public listed companies that will further go on to benefit from these government schemes. And hopefully, you will go on to find some stock market gems because of this research. That's all from my side for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to make YouTube Baba happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.